What are the facts? What are the facts we know about Luke? Because that's where we're going to start. We're going to look at the facts, and then we're going to ask what the facts mean. Well, we know he's a companion of Paul. Colossians 4:14 speaks of Luke, the doctor. In that same passage, we find out he's a doctor. Very important that Luke is a doctor. In 2 Timothy 4:11, only Luke is with me. Everyone else has abandoned Paul. When you're in jail in the first century, they don't bring you meals. You're dependent on whoever's on the outside to bring you food and take care of you. And Luke is faithful and stays with Paul and probably caring for whatever this thorn in the flesh was. Now here's sort of a new idea which I'm responsible for. I'm just a banjo player, so don't take this really seriously. Most of the biblical scholars don't. But I'm convinced that Luke is a slave. Why am I convinced of this? In the first century, most doctors were slaves. In fact, most professional people in the first century were slaves. It's what slave culture does. I'm from the South, and we had, for a long time, a slave culture. And in a slave culture, you don't aspire to become a doctor or a lawyer. You aspire to do nothing, right? The planter elite. That's what we had in the South. Do nothing. You have slaves that do things for you. In the first century, all of the admirals in Augustus's navy were all slaves. His personal physician, a man named Musa, was a slave. Later on in the Roman period, Domitian, the emperor, closed the medical schools because so many slaves were becoming doctors. So there's very good evidence, some reliable information. William Westermann is the man who did the great work on slavery in the Roman world. And this is where I got this idea from. The other idea that backs up Luke being a slave is he has a slave name. Luke is a slave name. There are two ways that you name slaves in the first century. First, you give them the title of a trait that you hope they have. So in the book of Philemon, we meet Onesimus. What does Onesimus mean? Useful. See? That's the kind of name you give to a slave. The most popular slave name in the first century was Philokurios, master lover. Yeah. So that's one way you name a slave. The second way you name a slave, and this is your big word for the day. Why use a little word that everybody can understand when you can use a big word that nobody understands, right? The word is hypocorism. 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 It means nickname. Right, nickname. So, and if you learn to tune your ear, you can hear slave names. About half of Paul's immediate followers are slaves. He always refers to them as fellow partners. He always calls the slaves fellow partners, and the people who aren't slaves, he refers to as his slaves in the letters, which I think is pretty cool. But my name is Michael. God forbid if I were to own a slave of the first century, I would name him Mike. Here, Luke. Hear it? Luke. It's a hypocorism for the name Lucian. And Paul has a relative named Lucian. He refers to him twice. So this makes the scholars' heads explode. But I suggest to you that Paul's relative Lucian purchases a slave, names him Luke, and gives him to Paul. He's a doctor. He gives him to Paul to take care of whatever this thorn in the flesh was. We think it's probably blindness. He's going blind.